He was sitting in the dust beside the road, too exhausted even to cry. I wasn't supposed to be on that road that day. I wasn't supposed to take the long way home, or stop by the old gas station with the flickering sign, or slow down at precisely the moment a scrap of movement on the shoulder caught my eye. But life has a way of shifting quietly, changing direction when you least expect it, nudging you towards something you didn't know you needed. The sun was setting, turning the world golden and sleepy, and the road ahead shimmered from heat. I was halfway through an audiobook, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, when I noticed what I thought was a crumpled piece of clothing, or maybe a torn bag someone had tossed out the window. But then it moved, just a twitch, the slightest, smallest shift. I hit the brakes without thinking. The car slowed to a crawl. Dust rose behind me like a ghost stretching in the twilight. I pulled onto the shoulder and stepped out, shielding my eyes from the low sun. At first I didn't see him. There was nothing but dirt, grass, and the husk of an old tire that must have been lying there for years. The cars passing in the distance sent waves of hot wind rolling over everything. Then I saw it, the tiniest patch of fur curled into itself like a wilted flower. A kitten, or something that had once been one. He was painfully small, thin enough that his ribs pressed sharply against his skin. His fur, though matted and filthy, was the soft pale orange of a sunrise. His eyes were half open, glazed, unfocused, as if he had used up the last of his strength waiting for something that never came. I knelt in the dust beside him. "Hey," I whispered, afraid even my voice might break him. "Hey, little one, can you hear me?" He didn't move. Not really, but his ears twitched just slightly, as if recognizing sound or wanting to. Carefully, slowly, I reached out and touched his fur. It was warm from the sun, but underneath, his body was trembling with a deep, exhausted shiver. He wasn't injured, not visibly, but he was dangerously weak, dehydrated, starved, abandoned. Someone had left him here. There was no other explanation, and they hadn't expected him to survive. My throat tightened. "It's okay," I whispered. "I've got you now." When I slid my hands underneath him, his entire body went limp. He didn't resist. He didn't even seem aware of what was happening, only that something finally was holding him again. His head lolled against my wrist, and for a terrifying second I thought I was too late. But then he exhaled, a soft, rasping little breath, and sank fully into my palms. I wrapped him in my jacket and carried him to the car like something made of glass. Inside, the air conditioning was cool, maybe too cool. I turned it down and set him on my lap, adjusting the jacket so it cocooned him gently. When I touched a finger to his cheek, he made a faint sound, half meow, half whimper. My heart cracked open. "I know," I whispered. "You're safe now. I promise. You're safe." The drive to the nearest vet clinic took 12 minutes. I timed every second with my heartbeat. 12 minutes can feel like a lifetime. I kept one hand on the kitten the whole way, feeling each fragile breath rise and fall. Several times I thought he'd stopped breathing altogether. Several times I whispered his name, even though I didn't have one for him yet, just to keep his awareness tethered to the world. When I finally ran through the clinic doors, cradling him like a dying star, the receptionist gasped. "Oh my God, let me get the doctor. Right now." They took him from my arms and rushed him to the back, their voices a blur of medical jargon I could barely process. Severe dehydration, malnourished, electrolyte imbalance, might crash. And then the doors swung closed, and I was left alone in the empty waiting room with my trembling hands and the awful echoing thought, what if I was too late? Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time twisted into something slow and suffocating. I sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time I moved, staring at the wall, at the floor, at my own knees, anything but the door. Every sound made me flinch. Every footstep made my heart leap. Finally, the vet stepped out. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a tired expression, the sort that belongs to someone who has seen too much suffering but still chooses to show up anyway. "He's stable," she said gently. "For now." The breath I didn't realize I'd been holding collapsed out of me in a shaky rush. "But he's very weak," she continued. "Very. He's been without food and water for a long time, possibly days, maybe longer." "Will he make it?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. She hesitated, just a second, but I caught it. "I won't lie," she said. "It's going to be a fight, but he's young and he's a survivor. With the right care, he has a chance." A chance, not a guarantee, not even a promise. But a chance was infinitely more than what he'd had an hour ago. "Can I see him?" I asked. The vet nodded and led me to a small room filled with the soft beeping of machines. There he was, a little flame-coloured bundle, tiny against the white towel he lay on, an IV line taped to his paw. His eyes were closed now, breathing shallow but steady. His fur was damp where they'd cleaned him, and for the first time I could see the faintest hints of what he'd look like once he was healthy. Soft, warm, luminous. "He's a fighter," the vet murmured, adjusting the IV. "He didn't give up out there." I brushed a finger lightly over his head. "You're not alone anymore," I whispered. He made a small sound in response, half sigh, half soft, tired acceptance. And in that moment I knew I wasn't leaving without him. The first night, I slept on the floor beside him. The vet let me stay after hours. They always had a few emergency cases overnight, and she must have sensed how deeply this little creature had already carved himself into my heart. I sat there, wrapped in a thin blanket they'd given me, listening to his breathing, watching the rise and fall of his tiny chest. Every few hours, a tech came in to check on him, adjusting fluids, making notes on a chart. "You okay?" one of them asked around midnight. I nodded. "You sure? You look like you haven't blinked since you got here." "I'm fine," I said quietly. "Just keeping him company." The tech smiled. "He's lucky, you know. Most people don't stop." I didn't have an answer for that. At some point around 4 a.m, exhaustion dragged me into a light sleep. When I woke, the sky outside the clinic window was tinted pink, and the world felt strangely gentle. The kitten was awake, just barely. His eyes were slits-faded amber, clouded with exhaustion, but they were open, and they were watching me. "Hey," I whispered, leaning closer. "You made it through the night." He blinked, slow and meaningful, as if he understood. I slipped a hand under the towel and stroked his side. This time, instead of collapsing into stillness, he shifted, just a little, pressing the tiniest fraction of his weight into my fingers. A trust so fragile it made my chest ache. He wasn't ready to come home for 3 more days. They kept him on fluids, gave him antibiotics, fed him syringe by syringe until he had enough energy to swallow on his own. Every improvement was microscopic, a slightly stronger meow, a little more alertness, a few grams of weight gained, but to me, each one felt monumental. On the 3rd day, the vet said the words I'd been praying for. "You can take him home. He'll need intensive care, but he's strong enough to leave." I carried him out of the clinic pressed against my chest in a soft blanket. He wasn't fully steady, still trembled occasionally, but there was new life in his eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. He fell asleep in the car within minutes. When we got home, I set up a small bed for him in the living room, a basket with blankets warmed in the dryer, a heating pad on low underneath, food and water bowls close by, and a shallow litter box. Everything he needed within a paw's reach. He stayed awake just long enough to look around. His gaze wandered over the room slow, thoughtful, unsure, and then he looked at me. For a moment we just stared at each other in the soft afternoon light. "You're safe," I promised him again. Then he curled into the blankets and slept. Really slept. Deeply, peacefully, for the first time in who knows how long. The next weeks were a blur of slow healing. He ate tiny meals 5 times a day, gradually growing stronger. His fur regained colour and softness. His paws, once too weak to support him, learned how to walk again clumsy steps at first, then more confident. He followed me everywhere, from room to room, closely, silently, always watching. I wondered how long he'd been alone before I found him. Long enough to learn fear, long enough to lose trust, long enough to believe no one was coming. But now when I reached out my hand, he leaned into it. Now when he slept, he did so deeply, without flinching at every sound. Now when I whispered his name, yes, I'd given him one, his ears perked, and he answered with a soft chirp. I named him Solace, because that's what he had become. He wasn't just a rescued kitten anymore. He was comfort, warmth, a quiet presence filling the spaces I hadn't realized were empty. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't taken that road, if I'd gone straight home, if I hadn't looked out the window at exactly the right moment. But I did. And because of that, a tiny abandoned life now slept curled against my side every evening, purring softly as though stitching my heart back together piece by piece. Solace grew stronger each day. His fur turned rich and fluffy. His eyes cleared from faded amber to brilliant gold. He learned how to play hesitantly at first, then with a wild, joyous energy that filled the house with life again. He discovered sunlight and claimed it as his throne. He learned that my lap was the safest place in the world. He decided that every closed door was personally offensive. He mastered the art of silent stares that meant, "Feed me now." He tried to befriend the vacuum cleaner. It didn't work. And every night, without fail, he curled up against me, resting his head on my arm as if afraid I might slip away while he slept. But that fear began to fade too, because little by little, day by day, he realized I wasn't going anywhere. Neither of us was. One day, months after the roadside, after the clinic, after every small miracle that had led us here, I sat on the porch steps at sunset with Solace purring in my lap. He watched the passing cars, the drifting clouds, the breeze dancing through the grass. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't fragile. He wasn't alone. He pressed his forehead against my chest, nudged my chin with his tiny nose, and let out a long, contented purr that vibrated straight into my heart. "You're home," I whispered into his fur. He blinked at me with slow, warm trust. And in that moment, with the golden light wrapping around us, I understood something quietly, deeply true. I had set out to save a kitten. I didn't know he would end up saving me too.